Okay, I think I will start. So first of all, welcome everyone. My name is Alex Moshkin. I'm a fellow at the Frankel Institute for Advanced Judaic Culture. As part of the Institute, Adriana Jacobs and I have put together a series, Stranger Still, translating contemporary poetry from Israel-Palestine, showcasing the diversity of poetic voices from Israel-Palestine through the lens of translation. Each event, which you can easily find on YouTube, included a multilingual poetry reading and a conversation between poets and translators on the careful negotiations that are involved in the act of translation, highlighting work that creates its own currents against and beyond the Israeli mainstream. Today is bittersweet because it marks the final episode of our series, but also very exciting because it features two fantastic poets, Sheikha Hlewa and Yosefa, who will read selections of their poems and translations in Arabic and English. They will join Adriana and I in a conversation about their experiences as Arabic and English language writers in Israel-Palestine, and Raz's English language translations of Hlewa's Arabic poetry. So Adriana, take it away.
So I'm just going to say a few more words about the structure of today's event. We'll start with readings of poems by our two speakers, and then Alex and I will have a conversation with them. And later we'll open it up to questions from you, from the audience. You can submit your questions via the Q&A function in Zoom. We can't promise that we'll get to all the questions, but we'll do our best. If you'd like, you can also activate the live captioning option, though this only transcribes English language speech and makes a really delightful chaos of any other language, but it's there if you wish to use it. And then last but not least, Alex and I wish to thank Jeff Eilinger and the Frankel Center for their support of this series, and also to Kelsey Keeves, who has done all the behind the scenes work that has made this event and the others possible. And with that, I will begin by introducing our first speaker. And I want to say that this brings me so much personal pleasure. I've been friends with Yosefa Raz for many years now, and I first became acquainted with Sheikha Hlewa's startling poetry through Yosefa's English translations, which we will hear very shortly after my introduction. So Sheikha Hussein Hlewa was born in Dhayl Araj, an unrecognized Bedouin village outside of Haifa, Israel. And as a child, she attended the Sisters of Nazareth School in Haifa, and later moved to Jaffa, where she completed a BA and MA in Arabic and Hebrew literature at Tel Aviv University, and currently is working on a PhD titled Individual and Collective Concerns in Contemporary Palestinian Women's Poetry at Bar Ilan University. For most of her adult life, she has worked as a teacher of Arabic and more recently as the educational program director for schools in East Jerusalem. But as she explained in a recent interview in Israel's daily newspaper Haaretz, several years ago, personal circumstances compelled a pause in her professional life. And in her words, and I quote, "My writing freed itself. I began to write with urgency. I felt like I was sitting in front of a psychologist and talking about myself, my childhood, my surroundings, about scenes that had been seared into me. And writing then became a form of self-care." Her poems and stories have been published online and in print in the Arab world. And in the last 5 years, she's published the poetry collection Outside the Seasons, I Learned How to Fly, which came out in 2015, and 3 short story collections, The Ladies of Twilight, Windows Are Spoiled Books, and Order C345, which won the 2019 Almultaqa Prize in the short story category and was translated into Hebrew by Ilana Hammerman as A Pause for Barking, and that came out with Afik Press in 2020. A new collection of poetry titled Maybe We'll Need More Than a Forest is forthcoming in an Arabic-Hebrew bilingual edition with Hebrew translations by the poet Rachel Peretz. And without further ado, I turn things over to Sheikha and to Yosefa. And I'm going to share the screen so we can see your wonderful poems and follow along with you. So let me get that going. Here we go. Okay.
Okay.
And Sheikha, I might need you to help me scroll through some of the longer Arabic poems. So just maybe give me a hand signal when I need to move the page. Okay.
It is the first poem, and it's actually the first poem that I wrote in my life. When I start writing, it was the first one, and it's concerned about the main question about my homeland, our homeland. كنت صغيرة جدا، لم يجتهد أحد من حولي كي يحدثني عن الوطن. اعتقدت لشتاءين متتاليين أن الوطن هو كيس نايل المتين الذي يصمد حول أحذيتنا يوما كاملا دون أن ينفذ منه وحل الطريق. الشتاء كان الغربة عن الوطن، الحذاء المتين كان وطنا بديلا. It's the first one, so Yosefa can.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. I was a little girl, homeland. I was a little girl, very little. No one around me bothered to tell me about homeland. For 2 winters straight, I thought homeland was the thick plastic bag that survives, wrapped around our shoes all day, doesn't let the mud get through. Then I was sure winter was the exile, and strong shoes were a different kind of homeland.
رقصة أخيرة. أيها الغريب، أشدك إلى حلقة رقص صاخبة وأنت تقدم لحم أصابعك دائرياً وأفقياً. يسأل النادل: هكذا يرقصون في بلادك؟ تقول: لا، بل هكذا نمشي فوق الماء. تحكي له كيف تناوبت مع شجرة عاقر، كيف احتمل لحمك إعلانات عن الكلاب الضائعة، كيف حقنت أوردتك بنمل أزرق. أذكرك عندما صليت واقفاً على رأسك تقاطرت من أنفك رسائل لم تسقط في البحر. أيها الغريب، أمسك يدك ونمشي تحت قوس النصر، تقرص تحت إبطك وتضحك للمارة. في بلادي نكحل الأطفال خوفاً من الحسد ريثما تأتي الطائرات بخبر مفرح. في بلادي يترك الرجال خيوطاً لزجة على أفخاذ النساء وهم يهرعون إلى المعركة الأخيرة. أنتم هنا تمارسون الحب على الأرصفة وتموتون بين شارعين أنيقين. أيها الغريب، تعال نشتري قهوة دبل إسبريسو، نشربها عند الجسر ونجري سمول توك عن مفردات الأقبية المنسية وانتظار المسيح. تهمس للجسر: أمي أوقدت الكتب التي خلفتها ورائي، وبالماء الذي طبخته أطعمت محارباً قديماً وقطط الحي. كانت تخاف فتنة المعاني، وأنا التبست علي دلالات الجسور. أيها الغريب، دعني أكتب لك وطناً. لا، في جهنم التي كتبتها احترقت كل الأوطان في الفصل الأخير. You can.
So this is actually the first poem that's going to be in your Hebrew Arabic book that's coming out soon. And we just translated it on Saturday, so it's fresh.
It's so fresh, yes.
So fresh. Last dance. Oh, stranger, I am pulling you onto the noisy dance floor, but you bite half moons around your fingernails. The waiter asks, is this how they dance in your country? You say, no, this is how they walk on water. You tell him how you switched places with a barren tree, how you stayed silent when they pierced your flesh with lost dog signs, how you injected blue ants in your veins. And I remind you, When you prayed standing on your head, shipwrecked letters came crumbling from your nose. Oh, stranger, I hold your hand and lead you under the victory arch. You tickle yourself under your armpits and laugh at the passers-by. In my land, they line the eyes of kids with coal against the evil eye until the planes return with glad tidings in their belly. In my land, men leave sticky threads on the thighs of women a moment before leaving for a final battle. And here, you make love on the sidewalks and die at crosswalks on fancy boulevards. Can you scroll down? Oh, stranger, let's buy a double espresso, drink it near the bridge, and talk, small talk. We'll find synonyms for hidden cellars and messianic arrivals. You'll whisper to the bridge, my mother burned the books I left behind and fed an old battle survivor and the neighborhood cats with the cooking water. She feared the heresies of the written word, and I grew bewildered by the interpretation of bridges. Oh, stranger, let me write you a homeland. No, in the hell that I wrote, all the homelands burned in the last chapter.
ماء بنكهة الموت. في قرية البدوية بين سجن الجلمة والمنصورة المنهزمة تدفق ماء الحياة فجأة في الأنابيب العاقرة. بعثت القرية من رمادها بعثا مؤقتا. لم يكن ذلك سحرا ولا معجزة. لقد سقط الجندي البدوي الأول في حربنا أمام عدو شرس، فليكن ذكره طيبا مؤبدا. وكانت الأرض خربة وخالية. قالوا فليكن ماء عذب في قريته، وكان ماء. صارت النساء تسبق الفجر وتملأ الجرار بماء حي قبل أن يتنفس الموت في أنابيب تزاحم جنديا بدويا على قبر آمن. وكنا بدوا مخلصين نرضع حليب الأم ونشرب ماء الخصيان. نولد بأعضاء تناسلية سليمة ولسان أخرس. في الصباح يرفع العجائز I will wait till this okay. في الصباح يرفع العجائز صلواتهم للمنان. في الليل يربطون أقدامنا وألسنتنا إلى عمود البيت. وأنا كنت أصلي لموت جماعي في قريتي لعله يجلب نوراً باهتاً لأكواخنا الهشة، موتاً يخلف نوراً. لكن كل الذين اختاروا الموت بعيداً عن حروب إسرائيل شيوخاً وشباباً لم يجلبوا معجزة النور. أعد ميتاً واحداً، 2، 3، 10. كم ستكلفنا حفنة ضوء؟ أعد موتاً واحداً، 2، 10. رحت بسذاجة أسأل جارتنا اليهودية من قرية الري: كم جندياً كلفتكم ليلة مضيئة؟ اكتفت بنظرة غبية وعادت تحصي حسنات الملوخية والكزبرة. ماذا تخرف هذه البنت؟ جرافات عملاقة جمعت القرية في كومة ودودة للبيئة برعاية طيبة من جيش إسرائيل. جارتنا اليهودية رحلت عن عالمنا. أنا رحلت إلى يافا. تعلمت شيئاً وبعض شيء عن العالم الحقير، وما زلت أخرف مع طفلة تسكنني. رأى المنان أن الظلام حسن وكان ظلام. يوسيفا.
Water. Pure water suddenly flowed through the barren faucets of my village between Jalma prison and Al-Mansura, the victorious, the defeated. The village was temporarily resurrected. The ground will swallow it any moment. No great miracle happened there, nor any sorcery. The first Bedouin soldier fell in our war against the evil enemy. May his memory be for a blessing. and there was water. I worried that the smell of death would filter through the pipes buried in the ground, but my mother made sure, like all the women in the village, to wake up in the dark dawn and fill an earthenware jug with first water, breathing distance from the grave of the dead Bedouin soldier. And as per the Bedouin custom, we were grateful. During dark years, we nursed mother's milk with castrating water. All the natives had perfect sex organs and a mute tongue. In the mornings, the elders of the village prayed for the grace of heavens, and at night they tied our feet and tongues to the column of the house. I longed for a mass death in the village. Maybe in return, we would get weak electric light in our rundown shack. But all those who chose to die far away from the wars of Israel, old and young, did not bring the redemption of light. I counted 1, 2, 3, 10. How much does it cost for a handful of light? Curious, I asked Livana, the Kurdish neighbor from the village of Helawy, how many soldiers did you pay for the well-lit night? She gave me a credulous look, went on and on about the wonders of maluchia and cilantro. What's that girl babbling about? Gigantic tractors gathered the village into an eco-friendly heap with the blessings of the Israeli army. Livana passed from this world, and I moved to Jaffa according to a traditional marriage agreement. I understood a thing or two about the miserable world, but I am still babbling with that girl inside of me. Better a village die in darkness than a Bedouin sell his soul for, may his memory be for a blessing. But this is beyond her understanding, much beyond.
خارج الفصول. I have to mention that this poem was included last summer in the final exam in the Israeli schools, high schools. It was the first time in the history that Palestinian poems was included in the Israeli schools. خارج الفصول. في الشتاء كانت أمي تترك خارج الكوخ دلواً. في الصباح تغسل وجهي وتقول: ماء المطر يجعل بشرة البنت ناعمة. في الصيف تتسلل وتجمع الملابس الداخلية التي نشرتها على حبل الغسيل. تقول: عيب أن يرى المارة ملابسك الداخلية. لا مارة ولا شحار، قطيع بقر هنا وراع أعمى هناك. في الربيع حينما أرفع صوتي في الغناء تقول: يكفي جنون. عرفت أن الغناء جنون ومن يومها عشقته. في الخريف لم يكن شيء يذكر. بين الفصول كانت تردد دائما: إذا نبت للبنت جناح يجب قصه، ولا تكسري عين أخيك أمام أصدقائه. خارج الفصول تعلمت الطيران. Yosefa.
Okay. Oh, and I'll also say that this poem was published in the Boston Review maybe 2 years ago, a year or two ago.
Yes, I remember now. Yes. In your translation.
Yeah, in this translation. Outside the seasons. In the winter, my mother used to put a bucket at the entrance to our shack. In the mornings, she'd wash my face and say, "Rainwater is good for your complexion." In the summer, she would sort the underthings I hung on the laundry line and say, "Shame, passerbys seeing your underthings." There's no one passing by, just a herd of goats and a blind shepherd. In the spring, I would lift my voice in song, and she would rebuke me. "Enough with your craziness." And I'm rushing after madness and justice since falling in love with poetry. In the fall, there was nothing interesting. Between the seasons, she used to say, "Someone needs to chop the wings growing on that girl. Don't break your brother's eye before his friends." Outside the seasons, I learned to fly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this reading. This was wonderful. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Yosefa Raz, a poet, translator, and scholar. She is currently an assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature at the University of Haifa. Yosefa completed her PhD in the joint doctoral program in Jewish Studies at UC Berkeley and the Graduate Theological Union, where she received the Gur Essay Prize in Jewish Studies and the Eisner Prize in Poetry. Her poetry books include In Exchange for Homeland and the chapbooks The Rumor of Darger's Army of Girls, and All These Years Practicing While Momentous Events Were Happening All Around. With Adriana Jacobs and Shachar Pinskill, she translated women's Hebrew poetry on American shores, focusing on the work of Anne Kleiman. Her translations of Dhayl Araj, Yaakov Beaton with Shaul Setter, and Sheikha Hlewa have appeared in the Ilana Review, Dibur, World Literature Today, and the Boston Review. Her poetry and essays have also appeared recently in Entropy, Jacket 2, Guernica, and the LA Review of Books. Her scholarship is focused on the often fraught transformation of prophecy into poetry, and reflections on this topic can be read in articles published in the Walt Whitman Quarterly Review and the Modern Language Quarterly, and in a forthcoming book tentatively titled The Poetics of Prophecy. Now we'll listen to some of Yosefa's poetry.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Adriana, for both inviting us. And I'll just say that it's so nice to see so many familiar faces, friends and family and students. So nice to see all of you. When we first started working together, Sheikha took me to a fortune teller who predicted my coming into her life, except that she said that it would be Yosef would be coming into her life. And so she got the gender wrong. So we're still working on that. I'm not sure what that means. But it was a very actually powerful experience. And there's a few poems that came out of that experience. This is one of them. The fortune teller said, "You've been smart and nice your whole life. Now you should be smart and a bitch." She was wearing a purple velvet housecoat, served coffee in tiny cups she turned upside down, then turned like a knob. She says, "Go see a woman's doctor." She sees 2 births, 1 death, matter-of-factly. She says, "Learn Arabic. It's the second national language." She would kiss me if she hadn't eaten onions. She sees uniforms, planes, twins, the letter R, the letter A. So this was written when Arabic was still the second national language, before Chok HaLeom. It's a bit utopian. Okay. Rules against translation. So this is a poem from my second full book manuscript called The Pleasures of War, which is an ironic title. Rules against translation. Do not use Hebrew. Use crayons. If war does not sing, it makes noise. Do not write in Hebrew. Macabre comes from gravedigger. I wanted to write stories like the Bobbsey twins, their great journey on bicycles, Area A, Area B, Area C. Let's not embarrass ourselves. There are minefields. No pushing at the farmer's market. If you wear long sleeves and a long skirt, do not ask the taxi driver about the Psalms. Do not describe the architecture, that poster of all the different doors. Do not name your city. In a group, immediately switch to English so as not to offend. You can play the clapping game. English, now, English, stop, English, transcribing ch, ch, ch. I heard it was like clearing your throat. We have forgotten the celestial sounds with our shopkeeper hearts. Don't sprinkle tidbits of your serious self like food for goldfish. Your fascism is provincial. Even your fascism is provincial. only a partial closet view when the neighbors come downstairs to try out the bed springs. No traditions, okay? Secretly taking over parts of the airport, we fill in the vowels. These birds over the letters can tell you how to sing. So this is another poem from this manuscript called The Pleasures of War, which is, a lot of it is about my 15 years of sojourn in America as more or less an Israeli, and having to do a lot of explaining of about my identity. I too drag around tin cans. I too drag around tin cans, so you can't kiss me. I too have been beat up by cabbies, thrown out of moving cars, gotten into screaming matches with cancerous secretaries. I too am covered in war paint like indelible ink, quick to jump, to bait, to horse, to flower. Don't look both ways when entering the river. I too seal off passages to my heart like a besieged country, cut losses, cut brothers, don't look back when I am lost in the forest. I too fear invisible drunken singers. I too fear white horses. I too can't forgive, can't stain glass out of here, can't tell you words of love when you ask for water. Okay, so I have two more poems. They're in Hebrew. They're translations. So I thought I would read translations of that poem in English. And I'll talk more in the Q&A about my translation process or quest. This is a translation that I did together with two people at different stages, with Rachel Peretz, who is actually Sheikha's main poetry translator, who's a wonderful poet, also in her own right, and translator. And I also worked on it some more at another stage. It was kind of like a relay race with my friend, who's a wonderful scholar and poet, Louis Greenwald. So I'll read it in Hebrew. כמוך גוררת קופסאות פח, ואינך יכול לנשק אותי. כמוך הרביצו לי נהגי מוניות, זרקו אותי באמצע נסיעה. כמוך צעקתי על מזכירות מסורטנות. כמוך מכוסה צבעי מלחמה בדיו בלתי מחיק, קופצת אחרי כל פיתיון על כל סוס. מיהרתי לפרוח, לא הסתכלתי לשני כיוונים בכניסה לנהר. כמוך מונעת מעברים ללב, ארץ תחת מצור, חותכת אובדנים, מאבדת אחים, לא מביטה לאחור כשטועה ביער. כמוך חרדה משירת שיכורים בלתי נראים. כמוך פוחדת מסוסים לבנים. כמוך לא יכולה לסלוח, לא יכולה להתאמר דרך ויטראז' צבעוני. לא יכולה לומר לך מילות אהבה אם ביקשת מים. Okay. So this next poem, you might not even call it a translation. But part of it had to do with my frustration about how my translations into Hebrew didn't sound like my Hebrew. My Hebrew is not as strong as my English. And so I tried to write a translation that sounded like the way that I would talk Hebrew. So you can tell me what you think about it. גם אני לא זוכרת מה רציתי לומר, החזקתי חזק ואז הכל נפל מהסל. כבר לא יכולה להחזיק את הצורות. ולמה להיות מדויקת? עדיף לצעוק או לבכות בקסם בעיר. גם אני, שזה הניסיון להשתחל פנימה עם העברית של אמא ואבא. Good enough. אתם מבינים? כבר לא שוק. אפילו העגבניות שהיינו מרימים שם בימי חמישי בערב. אבל גם לא מספיק לשון מעושנת. הלוואי עליי האף העדין, מספרים שמתאימים, זכר ונקבה, אז גם אני צל כבד וכולי. אצוד את עצמי בחדר התרגום עם האור המעומעם, בעלת הבית לא החליפה את הנורה. תדליקו את האור, יש פה רעש.
Okay. Thank you so much. Wow. Now I wish Alex and I could go and rethink all our questions, but that's great. There's such a wonderful gathering of poems. And Yosefa, I have so many questions about the two Hebrew translations. But so now Alex and I will enter in a conversation with you, and we'll try to, we may not get to everything we planned, because we want to make sure we leave some room for audience questions as well. But I will get started with a question for Sheikha, because I'm so interested in your trajectory. You had a long career in education before you began to publish literary works, but it's not as though you just started writing overnight. It's clear that literature was a part of your life, both at home and at school before you became a published writer. So could you tell us a little bit about where literature fit in your life before you started publishing? Oh, hold on, I need to unmute. Thank you.
Now you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Literature was always been present in my life as a reader, good reader. I choose, I think I remember that I read all the Arabic novels that I found. I could find it in my the library of my uncle. It was a small one. And then later when I studied literature and Arabic language in the University of Tel Aviv. And after that, when I became a teacher for literature and Arabic language, so I was in the place that I read the Arab literature and also literature from the word that was translated to Arabic. But I can consider myself in the past as a silent, a critic, and I didn't dream about writing, but I choose carefully things to read and even things to bring to my students at the high school in Jaffa. I started. I even didn't dream about writing or think that one day I will write something. But when I was reading such text or poems or stories, and I said, I prefer writing this like a different way, in different way. So when I start my writing at the age of 44, it's a very old age, not in the early, and I was a little bit confused, and I said, can I write like the famous and the known Arabic writer? So I was a little bit frightened because my past reading. But the literature was a part of my life all since I remember myself starting the reading.
I have a question for Yosefa. So Yosefa, as a poet, you're primarily known as a writer of English, but was this always the case? And at what point did English become your primary writing language, and why?
So I think I started writing in Hebrew when I was in the first or second grade. I always wanted to be a writer. And I think my first written thing is a kind of letter I wrote to myself in second grade when we left Israel, actually. As a family, we left to go for a few years to America. And I wrote like a parting letter about leaving Israel, and it was in Hebrew. But then there was a big kind of drama of acquiring English. We spoke English at home, so my parents are immigrants from America to Israel. And so we spoke some English at home. We spoke English at home. And then it was such a big drama getting the English. And I remember like when I first read a passage out loud in school, everyone clapped and it was like a really big deal. And I think it was such a drama that I loved it so much. And it's so hard to acquire that I just held on to it and loved reading. And when I came back to Israel in the 6th grade, I never quite felt comfortable again in Hebrew. And it just stayed with me and maybe also a way to kind of have my own bubble. I mean, it's weird because English is such a kind of imperial and big language that everyone speaks, but from my point of view, it was like my small little bubble language that was personal to me. And so somehow it stuck. So since then.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Sort of idiosyncratic.
Sheikha, I'll turn the next question over to you, but I want to, so this is sort of following up on what you said about how you were, a silent critic of Arabic literature, and you read widely, and you were curating things for your students and thinking about sort of what constitutes good literature and how you could do it in your own way and do it better. I would argue better. And I wanted to ask you about the publishing opportunities that exist for writers of Arabic in Israel, which I guess is another way of asking how an Arabic language writer reaches readers of Arabic in Israel. So you talked a little bit about one way is through pedagogy and you as a teacher bringing text to your students, but how would you compare that readership with the one that you have in the Arab world at large? And I'm thinking here of the sort of the big prize that you won for your collection of short stories and just comparing those markets.
Okay, there is a few publisher houses, Arabic houses here inside Israel. So we can publish through these houses, but the problem is not here. The problem is in the distribution of our books, because the main readers are in the Arab world, not here, because here we are a minority, and so we prefer as writers, me too, to publish in the Arab world. So I like Amman in Jordan, even in Beirut, Lebanon, but not, it's through a third, house publisher. So how can I reach? Because there is, now I need the help of Suha. Suha?
Hi. Hello.
Okay. Hello. النشر بالبلاد مش صعب، ولكن الوصول للعالم العربي من هون هو اللي صعب، لأنه الظروف السياسية ما بتسمح إنه الدور النشر المحلية تشارك بمعارض بالعالم العربي. Okay?
Okay. Yeah. So it's difficult. What is really hard and difficult is to reach to those publishing houses which are outside of Israel, like Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and so on, because politically it's hard and you can't reach everyone. So this is what she finds hard, what Sheikha finds hard.
النشر بقصد فيها نشر توزيع الكتاب. The distribution.
Yeah, for publishing, she needs. Yeah, distribution agencies, because you don't have a direct agent.
Yes. بس هي الكتابة أسهل يوصل للعالم العربي لما ننشره بعمان أو ببيروت أو بمصر، فهو بوصل للعالم العربي أكتر.
So it's easier to reach the Arabic audience throughout the Arabic world, Arabic speaking countries, whenever it's published in the Arab countries, such as Jordan, Lebanon, and so on.
بالنسبة للكتب اللي إحنا بنحصل عليها هين، هي بتكون طبعاً من خلال مثلاً إنه نشتري من رام الله، لأنه من رام الله ممكن سهل الحصول على هاي الكتب.
Yeah, you can buy it from places such as the city of Ramallah, inside the occupied territories, in the West Bank, for example.
Okay.
So the audience can get it from there. They can buy it there.
Thank you. I should say Sheikha
Suha.
Atamni is, I think, Yosefa in one of Yosefa's students, and she's very kindly helping us with interpretation in this portion of the event. So thank you, Sheikha.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, that is such a fascinating situation, actually, of publishing somewhere else and publishing outside of Israel. And it actually reminds me of the situation of some Russian language writers who also live in Israel, but actually publish their works in publishing houses in Moscow to reach much wider readership. But let me go back to the questions. My question is for both poets. So the question concerns self-translation. Sheikha, you know Hebrew, but don't translate your own work into that language. And same goes for you, Yosefa. And I know that in the past you have done exchanges with poets where you translate their works into English and they translate you into Hebrew. Could you each speak a bit about the decision not to self-translate? Is there a political dimension to this decision? And moreover, could you also talk a bit about the kind of self-translation that occur when you're working with translators that are translating you into a language that you know well?
Do you want to, Sheikha, should I start or you? You go. Okay. So I think for me, and this sort of follows up on the previous question you asked me, Alex, about choosing to write in English, which I think, I answered it very personally, but I think it has a political dimension that of a kind of way of backing out of a certain kind of nationalist discourse, right? And here I am in Israel, but finding all these other bubble spaces, right? The English department at Haifa and this sort of expat community, and finding other ways, being kind of finding othering spaces or inside of Israel. And I think there's a lot of advantages to that, and there's also disadvantages because you kind of have a kind of ghostly presence, right? And I do have a frustration of wanting to take up space, right? I want to be here and say, okay, here I am. Yeah, I am a poet here and I have things to say. So I feel like I have both instincts, and maybe my earlier instinct was to back out of those kinds of conversations and that discourse. And as I grow older, I want to take up more space. So, but then I have these habits, language habits that are very ingrained and rooted in me and part of me. And so translation really is very much kind of part of that. And I think I told Sheikha on Saturday, אני כלה מחפשת חתן, that I've gone on a lot of dates with translators, but I haven't quite found my perfect translator relationship. I've had lots of good experiences. And part of it, I think, has to do with the fact that in some ways my poems in English are already translations. It's like the Hebrew is right under there. In some of those, I think especially in that poem, Rules Against Translation, you can see it. And when I read it out loud, it's almost like the intonation is Hebrew, even though the language is English. Or Ariel Reznikov told me the intonation is Yiddish. It's something is happening there. And so it's like when it goes into Hebrew, it loses all those layers. And so it flattens. So I'm not really sure. I've been told different things, like Oded Volkstein, my friend Oded Volkstein, who's a wonderful translator, said, you're the only one who can translate your poems because you just have to make them something else. So I'm still figuring it out. It's like an open question. And, if you read Benjamin, getting to this sort of pure language, it's like I have to go back to Babel to figure out, how I get to, it's like I have to translate myself to, it's like a process of undoing the pain of the Tower of Babel. So I'm not sure, I might never find my chatan, my translator chatan. I found my other chatan, but so anyway, Sheikha.
I will try my English because I want to apologize about my English. It's because I'm a little bit confused. Okay, I have to say that I translate my poems and even my stories now to Hebrew, but I need to work with editor, someone to edit this my poems and my stories, because I'm not. I'm good in Hebrew, but I am not. It's not my tongue mother. It's not my language. Even I wrote the poem that we read here, Water. I wrote it in Hebrew, and then translated to Arabic. I made the two ways. So I translate my poems, but I take it to and I participate the editing with Rachel Peretz in the case of my poems, and with Ilana Hammerman. Ilana Hammerman, no, I didn't translate my stories. She translated my stories to Hebrew, but I was with her listening and try to say that I think something is wrong here. It's not the same in Arabic. I want it to be more close to Arabic. No, I know that translating to Hebrew, it's some, in the beginning, I was frightened because I thought it's not the same. It's not my poem. And when I started to read it in Hebrew, so I told Rachel Peretz, I told her that I cannot feel, it's the same poem, but I cannot feel it's mine. It's a kind of process that I need to wait till you know, it's like adoptive child. So you to use to understand him, and then you can accept that it's yours. It's your stories or your poems. Rachel Peretz cannot doesn't know Arabic either. Also Yosefa. So when we start to the editing, she asked me, please read it in Arabic. I want to hear the, you know, tzlil, the voice, how it sounds in Arabic. She doesn't know Arabic. So it's special working with my translators. But I cannot consider myself or see myself writing in Hebrew. I cannot feel the Hebrew the way I feel the Arabic. Or okay.
So Alex, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to kind of go off piste a little bit, and because there's a question from one of the attendees. Veronica Selver asks, what language do you speak together? And I actually think this is a really, this is a fascinating question, because I've heard the two of you speak Hebrew together. And I'm curious to know more about the role that Hebrew is playing here. Also because I know, Sheikha, that for you, being translated and published in Hebrew it's a sensitive and complicated process, and that you've gotten some criticism for your works appearing in Hebrew and collaborating in that respect. And yet I know that Hebrew plays this kind of, it is a sort of there in the middle. I don't want to say it's a mediating language necessarily, but it serves that function a bit between you and Yosefa. And so I'm so fascinated about the interplay between Arabic, Hebrew, and English as we move from your Arabic poems into Yosefa's English translations. So if you could, first of all, and yes, let us know which language you speak together, or which languages you speak together, and how those languages sort of, the interplay, describe the interplay between those languages.
Yeah, I think the Hebrew, I mean, we speak Hebrew together because that's our best. I don't know Arabic, and Sheikha's Hebrew is much better than her English, and also we work off a copy of the poems in Hebrew. There's a few poems that Sheikha wrote originally in Hebrew, like the water poem, but most of them are. We'll give credit to Rachel Peretz, who's been working with Sheikha in a much more concentrated way, translating Hebrew poems. Even though then, I'll work on the Hebrew poems for a while, and then we'll meet, and then suddenly Sheikha will say, no, wait, the Arabic's this way, so let's put the Hebrew aside. So it kind of, we use it to mediate, and then we jump off somewhere else. But I think also the Hebrew is mediating not just the poems, but where we are, right? We also meet in Tel Aviv or in Jaffa, and there's people walking in and out, like, waiters and parking spots and people. I mean, that's where we are. We're not in some kind of residency in Oxford or like in some Spain or somewhere. We're not in a neutral place. And I think that comes, and I think that has to do with also the way I think about translation, is that it's not just this neutral process of kind of creating a glass window between the Arabic and the, so that now we can see the Arabic poem, and now we're just putting a glass window so we can now see it more clearly. But that we're in this very complicated, fraught space between us. I mean, I even remember, Sheikha, when you came to Hebrew University to talk, when you came to Haifa, it was pure joy. But once you came to Hebrew University, and it was complicated, like, suddenly, like, someone said something kind of weird to you at the restaurant, you were asking for directions, and someone like made a face at you. I don't know, there was some kind of very subtle microaggression, and I realized that it was different for you to be moving through the space than for me. And there were just like these kinds of like, it's just like we're in this very complicated, and that's just a very subtle moment, of much more big processes, right, of ways of moving through the space. But and I think that has to come into the process. So, we're in Hebrew, and we use it, and we use it in a friendly, loving way, but it's a very fraught and conflicted language that we use together, and signifying of a fraught and conflicted space we're in together.
I think I will go off script as well, just because we have 7 minutes left. So okay. First of all, I wanted to say, Yosefa, that you already have 2 dates. Maya Barzilai asked if she can go on a translation date with you. And also Sabine Win asked the following question. Hello, Adriana and Alex. Sabine, who read in the series earlier this year. The poems that you read, Sheikha and Yosefa, were so beautiful. I wish I had more time on my hands so I could translate them into French. Do you work together on the translation of Sheikha poems? How do you feel about being translated in English, Sheikha? And finally, a question for both of you. Translation is somehow like an unraveling of a weaving. Exposing the vulnerability and the non-fixity of the original, but also revealing what its power is based on. Would you say that translating has taught you to write in a different way than you may have done if you had not translated?
Interesting. Sheikha, do you want to take this one? Okay.
Both of us, but I have to say that translating and working with a translator just make me think better about my writing, because when the translator asks me questions about things, it's not just about how to read my stories or my poems, because a lot of my poems have culture, Arabic culture science. Sometimes I use something from the Quran, from the Islamic environment. So when the translator asked me about things and what do you mean by that, and why do you think, and even just when she asked about why you should write about things like that, it's just we can see the gap, unfortunately, between the life of Arab people here and the Jewish people, because such friends like Yosefa and Rachel Peretz, who are more familiar and more want to know us, ask a question about this is the situation in your society, or this is what do you feel, or it's sometimes it's not a bridge, but it's like what Yosefa said, it's a window to look inside our life here. So it's about the Hebrew is not my enemy. There is no language you can consider it's an enemy. And I think it's the wrong thing that happened here in Israel, that a lot of people consider the Arabic language is the enemy. So they didn't learn Arabic here. A lot of people don't know Arabic. So I don't think Hebrew is a part of our conflict here, or our, what do you can call it, war or something. It's not a part. I think it's the opposite way. It's a part of understanding each other, the two languages here.
I think that's such a perfect place to end this event. And thank you so much. I'll make sure to pass on to both of you the questions and comments we didn't get to in the Q&A, but I want to thank all the attendees. Thank you for taking time and to be a part of this series. And Alex, any last words from you?
Just that I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think multilingualism in Israel-Palestine is such an important topic. So Adriana, thank you for being the mastermind of this. And even though we did it together, I think you deserve the lion's share of the things. And for this, I
appreciate it, but it's been a pleasure doing this with you. And thank you, Sheikha and Yosefa. I wish I could reach over and give you both a big hug. Hopefully we'll see each other in person somewhere. Yes.
Thank you, Yosefa, my dear.
Thank you.
Ilana and Alex. Thank you, Suha. Okay.
Thank you, Suha. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now and